So without further ado, moving right along. Total expenditures by category. You'll notice that the three blue pies here, work together to show what we spend in salaries and benefits and the travel. So the blue indicates what is spent percentage-wise of our budget on employees, reimbursed in employees, and it's almost 2/3 of the budget. Also, 14% of that other category is contractual staff. So Dr. Luparello is contractual, so she's in that bucket. She is not in the blue bucket. So when you add those two together, it's 62% of the budget that we spend directly to compensate our staff.
How would that, and I know this is one of the most recent years through COVID, how would that number compare to pre-COVID numbers?
So the last time I did this presentation, it was 63 or 4%. Or wait, no, 66. It was 66% the last time I did this,
Which was pre-COVID.
which was pre-COVID, yeah. So it is a little bit different. And part of this is Amendment 1 that we're looking at. So this is the current budget amendment categories that we're looking at here. And part of it is some of this COVID money. We have a requirement to have a balanced budget. And when we put the budget information into the state system, we have to tell them how we're going to spend every bit of that. And if we know we're going to spend it or we're not going to spend it, some of this COVID money we are reasonably certain we're not going to spend. But we still have to show the state how we're going to spend it. And so part of that money is sitting in other right now because we know we're not going to spend it. If we say we're going to spend it on salaries, then it affects the indirect rate and screws up every one of our programs. So we put it in other to balance the budget when we don't think we're going to spend it. And it's sitting out there as contractual staff and other. Because if we get to the point where we really need to bring somebody on to cover this, we have a surge or something, we'll go to a staffing agency and bring them on. So it is kind of skewed for COVID because we know there's money out there that we're not going to spend.
Would you say the majority of that 18% is in that kind of area?
Other has a lot of stuff in it, but there's a good portion of it. So then, source of funds. When you look at where the money comes from, 74% is state and federal grants, and then 7% of other. Designated fund is 2%, fees is 9%, and local appropriations, which is the money that the counties give us, is only 8% of the total budget. So when we're looking at that, without the local dollars, we would not be able to pull our grant funds because we have that maintenance of effort requirement. And they also are required to use for grant matching, and we can't use grant funds for capital improvement. So there's certain things local dollars have to be used for, and then some amount of those can be used on anything we want. But it makes up a very small percentage of our budget.
So the fees that we get for immunizations, where would those come in at?
Those would be in fees. So then grant requirements. Each grant has specific requirements on how we can spend their money. Money can't be spent from one grant to support work for another grant. And the only completely flexible funding that we have is the local dollars, which are the 8%. So every other dollar that we have has strings attached and rules that we can and cannot use. When I look at the programs, where the source of funds for the programs, I have these, there's 3 different slides here. The first one, these are essential local public health services. They are called essential local public health services. We have to provide these services. And the color coding here is the same as the previous graph. And you'll notice that the green is state and federal funding. And then the orange is fees. Local appropriations is yellow. And then blue is other. And designated fund balance is the red color. So most of these programs here that are ELPHS, what we call Essential Local Public Health Services, are funded primarily with grant dollars and very small percentages of local dollars there, you'll see. And when you're looking at that blue, that other, that is probably Medicaid cost-based reimbursement, or no, community stabilization dollars. So blue is community stabilization dollars. And the red, where we're using fund balance, that's money that is from either community stabilization or Medicaid cost-based reimbursement that is sitting in the fund balance but can only be spent on certain things, so it's designated. So that's what that is, drawing down some of that money that's sitting there. Then when you go into the next one, so these programs, the next two slides, are programs that are considered community need programs. They're not they're considered community needs, but we're required to provide many of these, not all of them. So this, we have some fees. We have more flexibility on these programs than we do with some of the other ones. And you'll see the source of funds there. You'll see that there's a little bit of local dollars spent to support WIC. And that is not a mandated program, but it's much needed in these communities. And then you'll see AAA, and they have, that's not, most health departments don't have AAA, we do here. Then moving on to the next source of funds graph, these are smaller dollar amounts, but you have, again, the green is state, federal, yellow is local. So this just kind of shows you where we're spending our local dollars. And I didn't put every program that we have on these graphs because we'd be here all day. There's 50 plus programs. So it just gives you an idea of where we're spending our money and where that money comes from. So we put local dollars into non-essential services oftentimes because they're needed in the communities. They allow us to pull extra grant dollars into our communities for services that are needed, but some of them come with matching requirements. So emergency preparedness has a 10% match requirement. Medicaid outreach has a 50-50 cost share requirement. So it also helps us to cover the operating overhead costs of the agency by contributing to the indirect. So even though we're spending $60,000 of WIC money in this budget of local dollars to support our WIC program, the WIC budget is then paying $212,000 of the agency's indirect costs. So that brings us out to a net gain of $152,000. So we're money ahead by spending that local dollars and bringing those dollars into the community to serve the citizens that need that food support. So maintenance of effort. Maintenance of effort was established back in 1992. It's never been adjusted for inflation. For the last 31 years, it's remained exactly the same, and the counties are required to support the health department by this amount. The amount set in 92 was $664,834, and the local public health department here received deep cuts in after the financial crisis of 2008. So from 2009, our funding level was still more than $200,000 more than it is today. We were cut I can't remember the exact number, it's later in the presentation, but over $300,000 we took cuts over a couple of years in our funding to help the counties get out of the situations that they were in. They cut our funding. We had a healthy fund balance, and they cut us back to maintenance of effort so that they could get their houses more stable with that financial crisis. We've never regained all those cuts that we took in 2009 here at this health department. So we are required to spend at least $664,834 of local money to be eligible to move the grants. This was set in the 90s as a cost share. The law stipulates that it should be a 50-50 cost share for ELPHS programs. And when you looked at those graphs, you noticed it's nowhere near 50/50 cost share for our ELPHS programs. We are meeting those requirements because we're spending those local dollars in other programs as well. So we are meeting the 664, but we are not meeting the 50/50 cost share. We get many more ELPHS dollars from the state than what we are getting local. So, in order to continue to get that, we have to have that maintenance of effort. And also things that we have to take into consideration when we're doing budgets and we're spending money is we have to comply with CFR 200 reporting requirements. We have to have a single audit every year. And one of those requirements in the single audit is that the grant, the staff time that are charged to the grant has to be actual time worked in the grant. It cannot be from a time study. It cannot be from a projection. The staff have to say, I worked this many hours in that grant. I worked this many hours in that grant. It has to be actual time because it has to accurately reflect the work performed, and the staff have to sign it off when they submit their timesheet. There's a statement on there that says, you know, I attest that this is reflective of how I actually spent my time working. And where that comes into play is that it makes it hard to budget because we've got 50 different programs and they have to keep track of. It's hard for our staff too because they have to keep track of how many hours they spent in this grant, how many hours they spent in that grant, and how many they spent here, there, and everywhere.
We lose productivity because of that. Because, I mean, I'm sorry, but if I gotta sit down and figure out, well, I just spent 8 minutes working on this grant, now I'm gonna go and work on another grant,
Exactly.
that's taking from work product.
Right.
Yeah.
And then how do you build back those hours? Do those, for instance, if an individual is working on a particular grant and has 10 hours on that grant, when that grant comes in, can you bill that grant back for that 10 hours? Or does that come out of the general budget? I mean, where does the money come from?
Their time would be, I mean, that's, when they submit their time sheet, they have to do it based on each grant, each program. So it's pulled at them, they're paid then every 2 weeks directly from those grant funds for that
That particular grant,
based on the number of hours that they work.
assuming the grant is awarded?
Well,
We get the notification at the beginning of the fiscal year, before the fiscal year starts.
Right.
We're already getting 2024 notifications of what our grant amounts will be. So
Okay.
we know ahead of time,
Okay.
this is how much you're gonna get for those programs.
so they're not working for a grant that we haven't already been awarded those
Okay.
grant dollars
Okay.
on.
But we only get 1/12 every month. So, you know, the grant might be 50 grand, but you're only gonna get 1/12 of that every month as you move through the
Right.
year.
Right.
Right. So where this gets really complicated when we're budgeting, and why it's so complicated is these little pie graphs on the right here. They are actual pie graphs of people's time. So when we're figuring out the budget, we say, you know, we have this much money in WIC and this much money. How much staff do we need to support that? And then we allocate the staff and we tell Rebecca, you have to spend 90% of your time working in reporting unit 10, or grant number 10, and you're going to spend 5% of your time working in reporting unit 101, which is workforce development. So that's where I'm expecting her to work. If she doesn't work where I told her to, then she's going to be reporting something different on her timesheet. And Rebecca is one of the lucky ones. She only has, I think, 4 or 5 RUs that she reports to. A good portion of our staff, all but 11, have more than one program that they have to report to. And that number is, the majority of them have more than like 3 to 9 programs that they have to keep track of. And some of the work qualifies under different grants. So if you're in with a WIC client and you're talking about Safe Sleep, you can charge that to WIC, or you can charge that to the Safe Sleep grant. So it's complicated. If you're talking to a WIC client and you find out, oh, they need an immunization, You know, you can't track a minute. Oh, I gotta go get your, you know, you can't track it by the minute. It's very complicated and it's very hard for our staff, but they have to do this. It's a requirement of CFR 200. They have to attest that I worked in these programs and keep them separate. So many of our, especially our clinical staff, they have all these different reporting units or programs to work in. They're giving, okay, you know, you have 11% of your time should be spent here, 10% there, 5% there. And if it doesn't work out that way because it took them longer to do X, Y, Z, then it can really affect the entire budget. Because we spend, when we budget, we spend every dollar, right? We don't spend to put any money in the fund balance. We try to spend every dollar. We don't have a lot of extra dollars. So we spend every one. The problem is if I'm reporting to, let's say I'm supposed to spend 80% of my time in WIC and 20% of my time in immunizations. If I spend 90% of my time in WIC and 10% in immunizations, when I get to the end of the year, there's not enough WIC dollars because I spent 10% too much time there to pay me. And now I've got immunization money that was supposed to pay me that doesn't get spent. And so I can't use that over here. I have to send it back. The only thing I can do is use local dollars because local dollars are the only money that can go wherever I need it to go. So 8%, and out of that 8% of local that I have to pay for all of capital improvements before I can start moving money around. So my window gets narrower and narrower.
But does this staff know, going into it, I would assume, right?
They do,
So
they're told,
aware of,
yes,
okay, I got 80, 20,
yes.
33, 34, that type of thing.
They do, but it's really hard for them sometimes to understand, especially with a lot of new people, what activity belongs to what program. Because like I said, some of it can be this or that. For example, it's very complicated. We have a dental RU. If you're doing a dental referral, that's the dental RU. If you're doing fluoride varnish on their teeth in the WIC program, that's WIC. It's confusing, it's complicated, and it's hard for new staff to get.
So is there a minimum amount of time that you can, turn in?
Yeah, it's a 15-minute block.
It's a 15-minute, okay, it's a quarter hour,
Yep.
okay.
So the hardest part of projecting expenses, because you know salaries are 62% of our budget, is staff time and making sure that they're working where they should be working. Also, I forgot to mention on that one. The bullet at the bottom here, all programs, if they aren't working where they're supposed to work, it affects the indirect rate. So our indirect rate is allocation. So administration, like when I work on payroll or HR stuff, it affects every department. So that allocation then gets spread out to all the departments through indirect. And the way we determine how much each program gets indirect, it's the percentage of that budget that they're spending salaries. So if WIC has 10% of the salaries, they get 10% of the indirect. If immunizations has 5% of the salaries, they get 5% of the indirect rate. So when those wages aren't where we expect them to be, the indirect rate changes. If we don't have a person because we can't hire a nurse, they don't have those wages, and now my whole percentage is all screwed up because it was based on 100% of the salaries being full all the time. Because they weren't, now every program's indirect rate changes. So it really can spiral into a mess very quickly if you're not on top of it. To make it more complicated, payroll has a 2-week lag time, right? We have a 2-week pay cycle, and then we pay on the 3rd Friday. So you work first Friday, the 2nd Friday, you turn in your timesheet, the 3rd Friday you get paid. But accrual method of accounting requires that we charge those wages to when they were worked, right? So when I get to like March of 2023, the timesheets were due on March the 10th. They included February 27th and 28th, which means the payroll wasn't even posted in the accounting system until March the 17th. So I can't even start my financial reports, or Brene can't start our financial reports because she does the majority of all of that. until after that payroll is calculated. So we're at least a month behind always before we see where trends are happening. Because we can't do it any faster because we have to have that. So always at least 3 weeks behind. Another thing that makes budgeting very complicated is FMLA. FMLA is a great law. It protects our employees and gives them the flexibility that they need. It's terrible for us. One, we have to do without people, but you can't always plan. If somebody's got a surgery plan, yeah, you can sometimes plan for that. But somebody gets injured or something happens, accidents, you know, they're not planned and you can't plan for them. So if we have a staff member that goes out on FMLA, if they have paid time off, they're going to get paid, right? If they don't, they're not drawing their salary. And now my indirect rate is all screwed up again because now salaries aren't getting spent. If they're off and they're, you know, off without pay during an FMLA, which a lot of our people end up in that situation. They have a lot of time, but they use a lot of time. So they don't have enough to get them through a 12-week FMLA. Then we're not paying salaries. And that affects indirect. It also affects the budget and all of that other things that would affect the indirect. But the leave time is also spread according to the distribution of the last payroll. So remember I told you, like, Becky has 2 RUs, and let's just say Becky doesn't spend, she has 5% of her time in 101 Workforce Development Grant, okay? That equals out to like 1 day a month she spends all day in that. If she has to work that, so that meeting that she goes to is in that payroll prior to her FMLA, all of her FMLA time gets spread according to however that payroll before it was spread. So if she said she worked 1 day, she was coming back from that workforce development meeting, she was in a car accident, she goes out on FMLA, and that was the only day that payroll she worked, 100% of her time, the whole time she's out, is now charged to that grant because that's the previous payroll. And we're required to charge it based on the previous payroll, the spread. So if somebody goes out on FMLA, it can have a lot of problems. We had a couple of years ago, we had an employee that was working in medical marijuana grant. They went out on FMLA. The grant ended, but 3 months later, we're still paying. We're still putting local dollars into that grant because that's where we have to charge her time. Because that's where she worked most recently.
Who makes that? That's the state? That's doing it?
No, that,
It's part of the 2 CFR, or CFR 200.
and that would be FMLA is federal.
But I mean,
The accounting
so
rules.
That's part of it.
Yeah, the accounting rules are the GATSB and the CFR 200.
Okay.
So,
Well, I'm stupid for the record.
it is. It is.
It's more than stupid.
Yeah, I did. Did you please write that down? Add that to the minutes.
But, so, you know, FMLA can really make a big problem for us. Also, we have a lot of it, right? We have a lot of it. We only have 75 people, and we've already had 9 FMLA events this year. Last year, we only had 9 total for the year, which was good. And this year, it's looking pretty high. We were at 9 already. But what really kills us is those things that happen in the last May, June, July, August, and September, because we can no longer make budget amendments. If somebody's off, we can't make an amendment. And if they're working in a grant, you know, there's just a lot that can go wrong.
Is it an average FMLA 4.5 or whatever you have just mentioned is for a multi-county agencies? We have 14 of them. Is it an average?
Where are we at compared to other agencies?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Sorry. But we do have a lot of them, and it creates a ripple effect because it affects the budget, but it also affects our ability to complete the minimum program requirements. It's could be a loss of salary and fringe in one program that causes the indirect rate to fluctuate. And, you know, we just have to figure out then how to cover it. We don't have a lot of extra people either. Employee turnover has been horrible, horrible, horrible. We're making progress though. In FY22 calculated the turnover, it was 47%. So,
47% of all staff turnover?
yes,
Wow.
that's the turnover rate.
Huge.
For FY23, we're doing much better. We're only at 18% right now. But since I did this, we have one person retiring tomorrow. No, 2 people tomorrow.
Yes.
2 people tomorrow.
Who's that? Commissioner Howard's too?
I don't know.
But the one's been here for over 30-some years.
Yes, yes.
Our retirees, these 2 haven't been here for 30 years.
Oh, no, not 30 years.
Okay.
Not these 2, but they're retirement age. Both of them are retirement age, so they're going.
But they've both been here for a long
I
time.
thought it was.
Yeah, probably 17, maybe-ish.
I think one of them was like 17 and one of them was like,
Medical staff or?
A
other-
nurse and sanitarian.
Oh, my.
Yep, so we're losing another nurse.
What's that? Get hired from overseas.
There you go.
oh, I'm not doing very good at staying on time. I'm going to try and be faster. When someone terminates employment, it does affect all the budgets because if that position isn't filled, again, it goes back to the indirect problem, affects everything. And it also can leave money on the table in a grant that's not spent. 35% of the people hired in FY22 were hired after the final budget amendment was calculated. And why that's important is because medical insurance. When we don't have enough money to pretend that everybody's going to have full coverage for their family, you know, everybody's going to have family coverage because we don't have enough money to do that. So when someone leaves, if they had single insurance and we hire somebody that has family, that's a $10,000 change in the budget just like that. That we can't control. And if it happens in the last 5 months, it's after the final budget amendment. So it can make a difference. Expenses are only half the battle. You have to also project the revenue. It's pretty easy to project what the grants are going to be, but we have a requirement to spend all fees first that we collect. So it's pretty easy to estimate the grant. But like EH revenue for well and septic permits and those kinds of things, they mostly come in the summer. And what's the summer? It's the last quarter. So we go all year and then bam, everything happens at the end. And if we project wrong, we don't have a chance to recalculate because the final budget amendment has already happened. So this is just a list of all of the things that we have to project revenue on. So challenges, COVID-19 caused a lot of new grants to come to the agency, and now that the grants are ending, the estimates from prior years are not good for anything. You know, we can't look at what was it last year because we pulled staff from here, we pulled staff from there to work over here, and now we're putting staff back. So it makes it hard to do that. The extreme turnover has really made it hard to do any kind of comparison forecasting. We've had positions that are vacant for a long period of time. We have to budget for them to be filled. But when we don't fill them, then we end up with unspent money. And it's impossible to plan for emerging threats. Each year there seems to be something different. We've had COVID, we've had PFAS, monkeypox, EEE, all kinds of things that you just can't plan for, but we have to be ready to respond to. And then, so maintenance of effort and local appropriations. The local maintenance of effort, again, was established in '92. It's never been adjusted for inflation. It's 664, 834, and we're required to be spent in order to pull down the grants. The local appropriations are reviewed yearly. We keep asking you for more money. They're currently set for $795,657, and that's still $202,353 less than this health department received from the counties in 2009. So we're going to continue to ask for money and try to get back to where we were before so that we can do a better job here. The agency should make a plan to increase local appropriations to ensure that we're in compliance with the 50/50 cost share. I've told you this before, we're not in compliance with the 50/50 cost share. We're not spending enough local dollars to meet that requirement of what we're getting 50/50 with the ELPHS funding.
Teresa, can I stop you real quick?
Sure.
So we're saying we're $202,000 short of what we were in 2009.
Yes.
Is that for inflation adjusted back figure? Or just
Real
that?
dollars.
From a cynical standpoint, though, I look at our budget, and I think of all this grant money that's coming in, and it almost feels like our local appreciations are there. If we come in with local appropriations, then maybe, what would we do different with $202,000? So if I go back to St. Joseph County and say, hey, the health agency wants us to put up another, $60,000, $70,000 from our local, but from our budget
I
at
don't
the
know,
county.
of that, you guys are gonna have to pay about 95.
$95,000.
We're not doing it.
But I'm saying if we did go back to our county and say I would from a county commissioner standpoint say, okay, well what is the health agency gonna do differently? Because it feels like right now, we are doing what the counties and what the public want us to do. What would we do differently with $202,000 more dollars?
Well, your wait time right now in environmental health service is long. So, we would, increase some staffing to be able to lower wait times. So if you wanna, I just had, this week, I had somebody call and say, we need well septic permits for this project in Hillsdale County. We didn't realize it was gonna take a couple of weeks for the sanitarium even to get out there on site. We're gonna lose our builder. I'm sorry, the people that applied before you, we have to address them first. We can't move you up in the line, we can't.
Is that, I mean, and part of that is probably, I know we've had some openings in all departments, and that's one, I know, small talk that he's got, but it's, I mean, part of that turnover is also compensation wages,
Sure.
where they can go work in Berry County and get paid $10,000 more than they are down here.
Absolutely. So we continue to struggle to compete with the wages that even some of our other local health departments are able to provide. So, there are, I can think of, staff shortages because of wait times, the salary, as Commissioner Leininger stated. We decimated our health education staff, after 2008, so that, really, we got to a point where we had one health educator, really. Now, we've been able, with COVID funds and some other funds, build that back up again, but if you noticed on the one graph, that is totally supported by, local dollars and the,
Community
community
stabilization.
stabilization dollars. So,
Just for your information, Ranch County, we are commissioners trying to ask all the departments to cut if possible, so that we can encourage or hire more sheriff department staff. So keep that in mind.
and we did that back in 2000, what year?
2009, we had still good funding. We had almost $1 million in local appropriations in 2009.
You can blame Teresa, Commissioner House, because he's a personnel guy now, and he wanted to hire more police, so you blame him.
Is part of your staffing problem, is that reflected by the wage that you pay out now relative to the other counties around you, other health departments around you? So in other words, other health departments around you pay more than this establishment. And what basis is that pay, what's the basis that pay is established on compared to other health departments in the area?
So as you and Hillsdale County are just embarking on your compensation study, we did one here, probably 4 years ago
In
now.
2019, yeah.
But also another local health department in Michigan just is wrapping up. Do we have that report yet?
I do have
So,
the graphs.
we can provide you with updated compensation study that will show, you know, where we sit with regards to other local health departments, you know, and it won't be muddied by a county compensation study that doesn't necessarily do public health work.
Right, and we're just now, with, when we gave 5% last year, we just arrived at what they recommended our salaries should have been in 2019.
Yeah, good point. I like, I mean, I personally like to see like a multi-county agencies, rural, example only, Cass County, Van Buren. They are like us, multi, so we can compare like Commissioner Lanius would say.
We can provide you with,
No, I have that.
yeah.
And Barry Hastings is another, you know, or Barry
Barry
Eaton, yeah.
Yeah, so Mr. Notley, who did that study for us, he is working on one for another health department, just like he's working on one for you guys. And he has, if you participate in that, and you answer his survey, he'll send you back the data. So I do have recent data.
Okay, so then what do you do with that data?
We present it to you.
That comes to the board.
Okay,
Yeah.
comes to the
Okay,
board.
and in 2019, and
Well, just last year, we.
not what we did, but in 2019, none of us here on this board were on the board in 2019, right? Or Tom
I
was.
came in 19, yeah.
I don't remember, he was,
I'm old, I cannot recall.
but yes, only Commissioner Matthew.
And so then it's the board's responsibility then to take that report and, if possible, implement it. You know, that's the biggest thing when we looked at salary and wages is,
Okay.
how do we implement this?
Okay,
You know,
yep.
that report calls for a 20% wage increase across the board. How do we afford a 20% wage increase? We're either gonna cut 20% of the staff, so we can give the other 20% of
But
the
that
wage.
20% would be split between 3 counties, right?
Well, I mean,
There's a formula in the
Of course,
intergovernmental
there's a formula.
agreement, yeah. Well, it's based on population.
Yeah,
Yep.
per
I mean,
capita.
that local appropriation, in the interlocal agreement, whatever it's set at, is that dollar amount per capita based on the last census population for each county.
You know the prison's not part of it.
And that's available to you all the time if you go to our website,
Okay.
scroll down to the bottom of the page, and
Okay.
there's Board of Health Resources. And you can find that intergovernmental agreement, the board bylaws, and other information that will help you to understand about those types of things.
Yeah, and St. Joseph County being the largest of the 3 counties pays more total, but the per capita rate is the same.
We moved it up to 515 last year.
Did we go up from, are we 530 this year?
I think it's 515.
I forget.
The thing that Teresa and I remain concerned about is that, you know, the law says 50-50, right? And we're getting far more than 50% in ELPHS. Or not, you know, it's more than 50, local is less than 50. So at some point, is somebody gonna come down here and say, hey, guess what, local? You haven't been meeting your obligation in the law, and you're gonna start making it up.
And I've read it somewhere and I haven't been able to find it yet. When I started as commissioner, I think it was maybe the MSU, new commissioner training school, I think that book entails that local appropriation is also supposed to, not just the local appropriation dollars, but the fees and stuff received at the local level as well are supposed to count in towards that 50-50 cost share.
And, you know, I did some inquiries, and part of the problem is the state doesn't even know, right? They don't know. When I inquire on it, I get told, however it was calculated in 1992, that's how you have to calculate it today. So if you included your fees then, you have to include them now. If you didn't include them then, you don't include them now.
What did we do?
No idea.
We included them.
Yeah, pardon me, Teresa, Becky serves on the NBL, that is medical lobbying group, correct?
MELF, the Michigan
in
Association
the-
for Local Public Health, yep.
She can obtain some information, or they are a lobbying group, they have all kind of stuff too, and other agents, she can provide us that too.
There is a lot of discussion on this 50-50 cost share because most health departments in Michigan are in the opposite problem that we have. You know, they're paying more local than they're getting in ELPHS. So they're screaming and hollering, we want this fixed.
Hopefully it's Wayne County.
Well, and I know Berry County, Berry and Eaton, they don't have the same per capita in their, local agreement that we do here. So, I think Berry County pays 40% of local contribution. Well, Eaton County has grown so much more than Berry County since that was created. Eaton County's getting a deal, and, you know,
Yeah, right, she works with
Are you?
she's about done.
I'm almost done. So we need to make a plan on how we're gonna fix this. And then, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the agency made great progress toward getting the Legacy MERS pension plan funded. We are waiting for our actuarial report to come in. Usually comes in early June. So I'll be sharing that with you as soon as we get it. But one of the things that we also should begin to consider, depending on what the actuarial report comes in as, is we have money sitting out there in a surplus fund. So at some point, we as an agency have to make the decision when we're going to start drawing that surplus in and using it to pay the payment. If we get to a point where we think it's time, so when the last actuarial report came out, it was projected that the pension plan would be fully funded in 2028. The original date was 2035 before we put in all this extra money. Then it was projected at 2028 when we crossed that line. If we are anywhere near 2028 still after this year, we want to consider pulling some of that surplus in to help pay the bill. So right now, $450,000 a year of our budget is spent to support this pension plan for previous employees that no longer work here.
Well, there are some current employees that were sold.
But the current employees are not part of the 450. So right now, we're spending $600,000 on MERS, defined benefit. 150 of that is current liability, 450 of that is prior year liability. The money in that surplus fund is never gonna come out until we take it out and apply it to something. So it's gonna keep growing and growing until we start taking it out. So what we as an agency have to figure out is when we pull out, how much we pull out and apply to our payment. So that we aren't spending $600,000 of our current year. Maybe we spend $400,000 of our current budget and we pull $200,000 out through the course of that year to help pay the premium. That would supplement our budget as well, because we're then pulling that and applying it to the liability. If you do that correctly, then when you get to fully funded out here in 2035, your surplus fund is almost depleted. Now, they changed the rules on me last year when they started now recommending that you have a surplus fund. They're not making any recommendation on how much you keep in your surplus fund, but because they changed the way they're doing the smoothing and they're forecasting a little bit differently, they're now recommending everybody has a surplus fund. So we no longer want to deplete our surplus fund completely, but we want to get it down. It's $2.5 million right now, right? We want to use some of that money so that we can balance paying the current staff an equitable wage so that we can keep them with making sure that the liability is taken care of.
I'm betting based on market conditions that 2028 is gonna be pushed out. Based on 2020.
Well, but the interesting thing is, you gotta remember, that report will be through December 31st.
It's an average, right? It's not solely based on 2022.
It is, it's based on, they do the smoothing and all of that, so it is based on 2022 with asset
Yeah.
smoothing and
Yeah, I bet you
stuff.
it's pushed out, but that's still, I see what your point is.
But I think there's also, the last report didn't have all the money we had put in there. So I think there was a contribution, a significant one, that happened after that.
Last fiscal year towards that surplus,
Yeah,
like,
So that will
700,000?
Okay. I thought that was already.
it was at least 300,000 that we sent last year, I think.
You know,
Last 2 years, right?
all right, we paid over $1 million in the last 2 years for that.
Yeah.
I think we started in 19 or 18, didn't we?
Yeah, we started a few years ago.
No.
We've spent a lot of money in that to get us to this point. Because, you know, like when you refinance your house, right? If you refinance your house, it's still 2035. We chose not to refinance the house, keep the payments what they are, and send the money to the surplus fund so that we get the paid off sooner.
Yeah.
But that money is sitting out there. It's gonna sit out there and continue to grow until we start applying it. And I've not been comfortable with where we are enough that it was the right time. I'm hoping that we can start applying some of that money in the next fiscal year, which will help potentially increase compensation to an equitable level so that we can retain staff.
So when we do that, though, Terry, going back to what we were just discussing, can we use those dollars for anything? I mean, they're not grant dollars, they would be considered local dollars.
Well, we can't use those dollars that are in that surplus fund for anything except for pension expenses. So when we suck them out of that surplus, we're gonna
And then
apply
it's
them
less
right
that
to
we're
that.
putting into the pension.
Right,
And
which
right
is
now,
why,
those dollars are coming, so the dollars that are funding the pension surplus now, what are those dollars? Are those dollars coming out of different grants?
They are.
Pension, or different grants and local and that type of thing?
yeah, they are coming out of grants. They're actually, we had to change how we did it because we only have 19 people left in the pension plan right now that are currently working. And it used to be they were charged based on which grant you were working in. But we have so many legacy people, we had to move it out because some grants weren't getting charged at all. Because most of their staff is new, like the WIC grant has almost no people in the defined benefit, but yet they're the largest portion of our staff. So we had to change it this year, and now the liability, the $450,000 liability is actually spread out through the indirect rate. So that is, but why you have to kind of try to time it so that it equals out at the same time is that money can never be spent on anything other than pension. It's in the surplus fund. And if we don't time it right, then that money can't be spent on anything else and it's gonna sit out there and continue to grow. And once we get past this defined benefit cliff in 2035, our, expenses are gonna go rock bottom
Well,
low.
we hope they do, but,
Yeah.
that's all still dependent on market
Sure.
fluctuation, utilization,
Sure.
because something we need to think about and consider as we move forward.
Right.
Yeah, in that line, I was thinking, is it a possibility these surplus funds need to be discussed in a finance committee more detailed and
Yeah.
come up with something?
Well, and we'll know more once we get that report from MERS on that.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to do anything today. I am just telling you that that's kind of what we have to consider. And when we have to do that at some point. When we pull the trigger on it is what we need to consider. And we need to weigh our options up to figure out when the best time is. And it may or may not be with next fiscal year. We won't know that until we have more information. Okay, so that took me a lot longer than I thought, sorry.
Appreciate
All
it.
right,
Just didn't talk fast enough.
I didn't.
we kept asking questions.
But it's good information.
Teresa, are we putting this on our website or no?
So what room, Becky, the lunch, so